On August 18, 1944, deep in the heart of central Texas, a prison camp was erected for the prisoners of war. A truck filled with German soldiers arrived at the gates, and at the back sat Lisa, a young nurse who hadn't seen a single drop of clean water in years. She had expected nothing but hardship, hunger, humiliation, maybe even death. But instead, when the truck came to a stop and she stepped off, the first thing she saw was a tall water tower, its thick pipe flowing freely into a long trough below. Water spilled over the edges, running into the dirt as if it was utterly insignificant. Back in Bremen, Lisa had counted every drop of dirty water, each spoonful, because water was a rare and precious commodity. But here, in this foreign land, the enemy allowed the water to run like it was of no value at all. The wastefulness hit her hard. And when an American soldier handed her a cold canteen of water, something broke inside her. She had never allowed herself to show emotion in public. Certainly not during the war, but in that moment, she couldn't hold it in. Tears poured down her face as she wondered. Why had the enemy provided her with more food, more safety, and more dignity than her own country had ever done? The truck's engine clicked as it cooled in the hot Texas sun, and for a few moments, no one moved. 40 German prisoners, their uniforms hanging off their emaciated bodies, stared blankly at the bright, harsh Texas sky. Lisa, 22 years old and exhausted, had followed the wounded soldiers from Bremen to France, and eventually to this camp. The long journey had worn her down, and now, in the sweltering heat of Texas, her body was drained. Her throat felt as if it had been coated with sand, and a dull headache pulsed behind her eyes. For months, she had measured water in small portions, spoonfuls, and chipped cups. The water in Bremen had been rationed to a few liters per person each day. The taps ran only for an hour in the morning, and if the pipes weren't broken, a second hour at night. She had become used to saving every drop of water for cooking, washing, and even cleaning the floors. But here, in this foreign land, the enemy had no need for rationing. The sight of water flowing freely, wasted into the ground, was more than she could bear. It felt like an insult to her suffering. When Lisa finally managed to tear her eyes away from the water, she was guided to stand in line with the other prisoners. The American sergeant, clipboard in hand, walked down the line, checking the names of each prisoner. Lisa's eyes kept drifting back to the flowing water, and the more she stared, the more it gnawed at her. Aye, the air burned her throat, but seeing the water so abundant made her realize how much she had come to expect the worst. Lisa had heard the rumors. The Germans were told that being captured by the Americans meant danger, especially for women. They had warned her of camps, of showers, and of horrors awaiting her. But in this moment, as she stood in line with the others, she began to question everything. How could the enemy, whom she had been taught to fear, offer her something so basic, clean water, when her own country had left her to suffer? The sergeant approached Lisa, and when he saw her staring at the trough, his expression softened. For a brief moment, the harshness of the military facade slipped away. He turned to a younger guard and ordered, "Grab the canteens, full ones." A few moments later, the guard returned, carrying 40 full canteens, one for each prisoner from the truck. Lisa counted them without meaning to. It struck her as absurd. On the journey to America, they had been guarded with rifles, but here the enemy handed them water freely. When the guard reached Lisa, he placed the canteen into her trembling hands. The metal was cool to the touch, and the condensation formed tiny droplets on the surface. The weight of the canteen felt unreal, like a dream. The sergeant reassured her, speaking slowly so that she could understand. "It's clean, straight from the well." Her heart raced as she unscrewed the cap. The sound of the metal felt loud in the quiet air. As she lifted the canteen to her lips, the water hit her like a shock. It was cold, pure, and free from the horrible taste of rust or chemicals she had grown used to. For the first time in years, the pain in her throat was soothed by the refreshing coldness. But the moment of relief was short-lived. The word showers floated through the line, and Lisa's heart dropped. In her mind, that word was associated with the nightmares of the concentration camps, the gas chambers disguised as showers. She had heard the rumors from other nurses in Bremen, the whispers of terrible things that awaited them. The guards ushered the prisoners toward a low building, and the air around Lisa tightened. She had survived the bombings, the hunger, and the constant fear, but now, one simple word, showers, made her knees weak. She feared what awaited her behind that door. Would this be the end? When they entered the building, the room was surprisingly clean. There were no signs of the terror she had expected. The guards led the women to showers, and Lisa realized this was not what she had imagined. There were no gas chambers, no cruel guards. There was only a simple shower, a stream of hot water and soap. It was an alien experience for Lisa, who had been taught to fear the enemy. As the water poured down over her, Lisa stood there, stunned. She felt the warmth on her skin and the grime of the war melting away. For a moment, she was transported back to simpler times, her mother washing laundry in their small yard in Bremen, before the war had torn everything apart. The soap smelled faintly of clean laundry, and the water, though nothing extraordinary, brought a sense of calm and relief. The woman standing next to her, overcome with emotion, began to cry. Lisa felt the tears coming too, but they were different now. It wasn't just sadness for her own pain, but for the realization that despite all that had been taken from her, there was kindness here. The next surprise came when they were escorted to the mess hall. The smell of food was overpowering, meat frying, bread baking, and something sweet wafting through the air. Lisa walked down the line, her tray growing heavier with each item the American cooks placed on it: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a piece of cake. She froze. This was more food than she had seen in months. In Bremen, her daily ration had been meager, consisting mostly of bread, a little margarine, and thin soup. But here, they were given a full meal. Real food. For a moment, Lisa couldn't process it. How could she accept this when her own people had offered her so little? When she finally sat down to eat, she took small bites, savoring the taste of real food. The meatloaf was rich and salty, the potatoes soft and warm, and the milk, cold and sweet, was a luxury she hadn't tasted in years. The weeks passed, and Lisa adjusted to the strange new routine at Camp Swift. The rules were simple but clear: work, eat, rest. There were no more constant threats, no more endless days of fear. She began to work in the camp's laundry, sorting and washing uniforms, and the comparison to the conditions in Bremen was stark. Here, there were fresh supplies, hot water, and clean fabric. In Germany, they had worked with rags and torn sheets, but in Texas, everything was different. The enemy, who she had been taught to hate, had provided her with the basics of survival: clean water, food, and safety. She started to see the enemy differently. They weren't monsters, they were just people, trying to get through the war, just as she was. The real shock came when news arrived that Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Lisa and the other prisoners were told they would soon be returning home, but the world they would return to was no longer the same. Germany was in ruins, and her old life was lost. But Lisa had changed too. She had come to Texas expecting to face cruelty and death, but instead, she had found humanity in the most unlikely of places. She had been given water, food, and safety by the very people she had been taught to fear. And as she prepared to leave the camp, she knew she would never forget the lessons she had learned in that strange land. Lisa's story is one of transformation. A journey from a prisoner of war to someone who had learned the true meaning of humanity. The abundance she found in Texas, the kindness of strangers, and the simple acts of generosity had shattered the propaganda she had once believed. In the end, it was not the enemy's bombs that had broken her. It was the simple, stubborn truth of a canteen of water.